In the early 1920s, there was a hospital on the hill that was completely self-sustained. They raised livestock, grew vegetables, and even had their own post office. If you needed it to live, then you could get it there. And that was a good thing, because regardless if you were a patient, doctor, nurse, janitor, whatever, you weren't ever leaving. Tuberculosis ravaged the city beneath it, and they tried their best to send it up to the hospital on the hill and keep it there. Doctor or patient, you committed to a life at the hospital in order to save the people still untouched in the city. Intentions were good. No one really sets out to build an evil hospital, per se. So many deaths leave a scar, though. Tens of thousands push through that line between life and death in that hospital on the hill. It's similar to a hole in an old worn sweater that you've worn for years and years. The more you pick at it, the more it unravels. Send thousands of people through one very specific hole, and it's bound to irreparably rip open. I hope you'll notice that I'm careful not to refer to the hospital by its given name, and that is intentional on my part. The name itself is notorious. I don't want any of you all to make the same mistake that I did. Because it was a mistake. We thought we were untouchable, in the way that teenage courage still lingers in you in your early 20s. We thought it'd be fun. We could just go to Waffle House after to compare photos and laugh. The hospital saw us, though. Peter, more than any of us. God, Peter. We were all friends from high school. We grew up in the foothills surrounding the hospital, and all of us knew about it, but weren't that interested in it. It wasn't the 1970s anymore, and you couldn't break into it anymore like our parents used to. My dad was even personally responsible for some graffiti on the 4th floor, he said. We grew apart, though, like most high school friends do. I stayed to go to the local university, while Sam went to Vanderbilt. Lucas to a small private school in Virginia, and Peter went the furthest to Texas A&M on a football scholarship. We kept in contact as best we could, but 4 years is a long time, and it eventually turned into just liking each other's Facebook posts and texts on birthdays. Peter sent a group text to all of us in early September out of the blue. He said he'd be back in town visiting his family. We should all get together if any of us were close or wanted to make the drive. Now, I'd never left the city, so of course I was in. Sam made the easy drive up, only a couple of hours. Only Lucas begged off, not wanting to make the long drive back. We planned to meet up at a new bar that had only opened up in the recently trendy parts of town. It wasn't exactly our scene. Peter had gotten there first. I could see his hulking frame in a small booth in the corner. He'd already ordered cheese fries. "Hey, man," I said as I slid in opposite him. "How are things?" He put up a hand. He was still chewing. Peter was a large man, which, when he played football, came in handy and combined with considerable practice landed him a football scholarship. He lost it in his second year, though, ACL tear. He could never play the same. He pretended it didn't bother him, but he dropped out of school soon after. He'd stayed in College Station, working some mechanic job. He didn't talk much about it. I knew his family had wanted him to move back here, but I guessed he's probably just too proud. "I'm good, man," he said, his voice booming as ever. "Living the dream, you know?" I chuckled. Living the dream meant you hated your goddamn life. Sam slid in easily next to me, shaking the rain from his coat, and immediately grabbed some of Peter's cheese fries. Sometimes, no matter how much time is between you, you can just slide back into routine. "You could." "You could ask," Peter said to Sam, feigning offense. Sam shook his head. "I'm doing you a favor. You're already the size of a brick house. You don't need a second story added." Yeah, whatever." Peter pulled the basket of fries back to him. "I got a great idea, guys. I admit that I've lured you here under false pretense, but we're going to do something so sick." Sam and I exchanged looks. Usually Peter's sick ideas were just throwing a brick through a neighbor's car window or petty graffiti on the bridge downtown. Low-level crime, just enough to get a thrill, but Not so high that you'd get in serious trouble for it. That was Peter for you. We were 25, though, and I had a good job that I didn't want to jeopardize because of some teenage graffiti shit. Plus, I don't think Amanda would bail me out if I called. Talk about another reason to call the wedding off. She already tried to call it off once because I wasn't as enthusiastic as she'd wanted about the flower colors. All right, hit us with it, Sam said. Peter looked around and leaned in closer, gesturing for us to do the same. The hospital. We're going. You remember Sheila from high school? She dog sits for the owner now, and she can get us in. I mean, for a fee, but like a small one. Who's in? Sam and I now openly looked at each other. Why the fuck would we want to go to the old hospital? The place probably still had tuberculosis. Peter didn't look so good, though. He looked beat down more than I'd ever seen him. We were still so young. Maybe we owed him just this one thing. Might even be fun. Just a laugh, you know. See a creepy old hospital, scare each other with some well-timed bangs on the wall. Take a couple of photos. The works. It was almost October after all. This might even get me in the Halloween spirit enough to take up Amanda on her idea of couples costumes. So we asked. Maybe Peter knew it was more out of pity than anything, but he kept assuring us it'd be fun. Almost desperately so. The building itself was imposing. It almost felt like anyone building the hulking Tudor Gothic facade knew that it'd be haunted one day. Maybe it just grew to fit the part. We met Sheila under the main entrance, the stone solid and menacing in arches over us. Someone had spray-painted "I love pot" by the main door, which was a charming addition to the behemoth before us. She assured us that she wasn't going in that creepy-ass haunted fucking nightmare, but let us in the front entrance. She said that she'd wait in her car to lock up after us, then left. The door shut firmly behind us, and we looked out into the main lobby of the building. It must have been impressive when it was built. There were marble floors and arches carved into living flowers that met the high beams of the ceiling. It was more open and airy than I'd anticipated. When I thought of hospitals, I always thought of suffocating white corridors, but this building seemed to have more windows than actual walls. This also meant that it was freezing, and the wind blew forcefully down every corridor. Peter led us down the hallway, pointing out various rooms and the stories that went with them. There was a young boy who liked to play with toys left behind, a nurse who had hung herself, and a woman who roamed the hallways looking for her sister, who had made it out. It was all pretty cliché scary story stuff. I remember just wondering if I was going to get tetanus from the walls. Sam looked equally unimpressed, though we were all freezing from the wind. And then we got to the 4th floor. Our flashlights barely seemed to penetrate the grainy darkness of the hallways. According to Peter, this was the floor that had the operating room. A lot of people didn't make it out of the operating room, he said. I felt the prickling on the back of my neck. The way you feel when there's no one behind you, but there might be something behind you. I whipped around a couple of times as the wind slammed doors shut, suddenly. Sam mustered up a weak smile, but we were all feeling it. It wasn't fun anymore. We stood in a small pseudo-lobby in front of an operating room, surrounded by empty doorways. I've got to take a leak, Peter announced, breaking the creepy atmosphere. So what, do we leave now? Sam asked, trying desperately to not look like he was as eager as he was. Peter shook his head. Nah, I'll go down there. Be back in a bit. Please don't piss on the ground. That's disgusting, I said, as Peter laughed and disappeared around one of the corners. I'm probably not the first one, he called behind. Sam and I slid down one of the walls, careful to not have any open space between us. Sam pulled a granola bar out of his pocket and offered it to me. I wasn't hungry. So, this sucks, right? Peter said, his mouth full of granola. Yeah, dude, I fucking hate this place. It's cold as shit, and we're probably picking up like 5 different diseases. Sam nodded, still chewing. It'd been a while that we sat there. Sam and I both instinctively knew that the second we got up to look for Peter, he'd jump out from behind the door to scare us, so we waited. We figured he'd tire himself out and come sulking back eventually. He didn't, though. I don't know how long we waited, maybe 30 minutes before we figured we'd be a good sport and go find him. We dusted ourselves off and stood, trying to look down the hallway for Peter's large shape, trying to hide in a doorway. Nothing but darkness. Sam handed me one of the flashlights, and we made our way down the hallway, shining the flashlight into every room. And then they went out. Sam and I both cursed in unison. "Peter!" Sam called into the hallway. "I know you're not still pissing. Our flashlights went out. We need yours. Meet us by the elevator shaft, okay? We're gonna go home." Silence met us. I remember being pissed that Peter was really committing to this bit. Then a small blue ball rolled down the hallway and stopped a few feet short of us. Sam and I both looked at it. And then at each other. Sam murmured under his breath, then launched the ball back down the hall. He'd been a pitcher in high school. Maybe that's why he didn't hear it land. "Peter, you jackass!" he called, stomping back down the hallway towards where the ball had come from. I heard a knocking down the opposite end behind us. "Hey, you check down there. I heard something down here, so I'll go look for him there. Meet up in a bit, okay?" I said. Sam nodded, then continued down the hallway. I turned back to the darkness ahead and tried to use the weak light from my phone to see the way. Eventually, that drained the battery, and it clicked off unceremoniously. I was alone, with only the moonlight trying to make it through the windows. And that's when I saw it. Standing by a pile of leaves that must have been blown through the windows. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't a ghost, or at least one that I'd ever heard of. It was the absence of light, hanging by a window. Its form was almost human-like, but rippling in the breeze. It was a more than solid shadow. It didn't have a face per se, but I could feel it looking at me. We seemed to look at each other for a long time, but I'm not sure how long. It must have been seconds. Could have been an hour. It didn't seem angry, and I think maybe that's why I followed it. It just wanted to show me something. I climbed the stairs after it. It seemed to blink in and out of space and simply reappearing in the next place it wanted to be. I was in a haze, completely forgetting about Sam and Peter. I was scared, but compelled to follow it, to see it through. Maybe I owed it that much. The roof was cold, and the wind howled through the trees. The figure disappeared, but maybe the moon was too bright for me to see it up there. I could still see Sheila's car parked down below. I waved, but she wasn't looking up. I thought about the patients who must have laid up here, using the sun to try to save their pale skin. I lay down on the edge and closed my eyes, thinking of them who lived and died so long ago. They must have been so lonely. I felt their presence, and I wept. They were so lonely. They just wanted me to understand what their life was like. On the roof every day, in the warmth and the freezing cold, left for hours to just sit and contemplate the ends of their lives, blood staining their clothes with every exhale. They must have looked at these hills thousands of times before it was the last thing they ever saw. I cried for them. I felt them so close inside my chest. I felt their hands on me. They caressed me, soothed me. Then, more forceful, I felt them pushing me. I slid closer and closer to the edge of the roof, compelled by something. It would be so easy to just fall. Effortless. I leaned into it. "Jack!" Sam was calling my name. I felt hands again, warmer now, as Sam pulled me from the roof's edge. I opened my eyes and met his pupils wide and wild, his hair was damp. Peter is... He stopped, gagging. We have to go now! I followed Sam wordlessly as he pounded down the steps. Flight after flight until we burst through the lobby doors. Sheila was sleeping in her car, oblivious to us sprinting to the old Luminera. She screamed as Sam slammed his hands against the driver's window. Open up, Sheila! God damn it, we have to go! What the fuck, Sam? You scared the shit out of me! She yelled, unlocking the passenger side door. Sam threw me into the back seat and almost dove into the passenger front seat next to her. She sat there shaking, his head in his hands. Sheila and I looked at each other, both unsure of what to do. Sam just sat there, trying to speak but unable to get anything out. Where is Peter, Sam? Sheila asked, her voice low. Sam just shook his head back and forth, back and forth. I watched him do it, Sam said. So quietly I almost missed it. Watched him do what? I asked, almost as quietly as he had said it. He just swung back and forth, back and forth. God, He shook his head, still buried in his palms. We need to call the police, I said, suddenly calmer than I had been all night. We could call one small number and then it'd be someone else's problem, someone else's nightmare. Oh, fuck. I'm definitely getting fired, Sheila said, staring wide-eyed at the building that loomed before us. Sheila did get fired. Sam and I got knocked with a trespassing charge. I think they went easy on us, though, because of what they found. They did end up finding Peter, a task that Sam and I had failed so woefully at. He was on the 3rd floor, a puddle of urine under him. He swayed in the breeze, his neck so purple it was almost black. He had hung himself from one of the doorways with a thick rope, but we're not sure he had actually brought with him. According to the coroner reports, he died almost instantly after leaving Sam and me. It made sense. His life had fallen apart after losing their scholarship. He was broke, too. His death had made sense, and desperate for the attention that he'd lost, he decided to go out with style in the old abandoned hospital. I wondered what they would have said about my death had it been successful. Young man, successful and engaged to the love of his life, throws himself off the hospital roof. Would mine have been less believable? Amanda left me. I don't blame her. Sam got fired soon after drinking on the job. We met now in the trendy bar where we met Peter that night. We drink in silence for the most part. Sam won't tell me what he saw when he went looking for Peter. Shakes his head when I ask. He doesn't ask me why I was on the roof teetering off the edge. We don't talk about it. We just drink for Peter. And for the others we left behind there at the hospital. They're so lonely. We're lonely too. Hey there, kids, and happy Halloween. It's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video, or listening to tonight's episode this Oktoberfest on the podcast. If you're not listening on the podcast, then you always can listen on the podcast at Spotify, or just about anywhere you find a podcast. And if you're not listening on YouTube, then you can find it on YouTube, or just about anywhere you find a YouTube. I just want to remind all of you that if you're on a cold autumn night and you need a warm drink, then my wife sells tea. There's tea available at etsy.com/shop/ivory-monocle-tea. All different kinds, including those themed off of creepypastas, horror icons, horror monsters and Dungeons & Dragons. And if you order that Creepypasta set with the MrCreepyPasta's Dark and Stormy Night, the actual tea that I drink while recording these stories, well, probably about 60% of the time, then you can always ask for that MCP dabbing sticker instead of the classic channel icon sticker. And I get a kick out of it every time someone asks her to do that. Also, I wanted to say thank you, all of you, who are supporting me on Patreon. It's patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. If you ever want to help support the show, keep the lights on, feed my cats, and the like, you can always head over to patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, and you can support the show there. Even $1 is greatly appreciated. And I have a very special thank you to these guys, such as Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Mr. Thud, Ken Lando Higuchi, Chompski, Nico Kaeo, Tristain Pelton, Stephen VanHuss, Chance Burnett, Deanna Kraus, G. Weevil 3, TheRedOakShieldVirus, CoryxKenshin, Pothead Holmes, Rival1, JimboTheHutt, Caspian, Jordan Nells, The Village Witch, Hades' Nephew, Jordan Wayne Deckard, Bradley Leipe, Ann Charron, AcidSystem, Mike Bullock, Fooly Cooly Dude, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation, Brian Arse, Cryptic Nightmares, Shadow Morningstar, Brianna Wright, Someone You Love, Said the King 56, Bad Honey, S-Man, Kiri the Sloth, Thomas Burgett, Liam Newman, Sky Harbor, Caleb Dougal, Last Blade Song, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, and Aaron Stormcrow. And another thank you to all you guys who are in the description down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you all for listening. And I hope you all have a wonderfully happy Halloween. Sweet dreams.